Hey gang, it's Squill. And back when I did that poll letting you guys rank every Adventure Time character, the characters who got the top 2 spots were none other than Finn and Ice King. And that got me thinking how it's about time I get around to doing that Finn and Ice King video. After all, it's a video I've wanted to do for a while now, as for the longest time I've considered Finn and Ice King to be my favorite character dynamic in the entire show. Of course, after Fiona and Cake, I'm pretty confident that Simon and Betty have eclipsed them for me. But these two are still a very close second, and are easily one of the most important character duos in the entire show. The evolution of Finn and Ice King's dynamic throughout Adventure Time's run represents something very special about the series. Let's discuss. I think it's safe to say that Adventure Time does not start out with Finn and Ice King on the friendliest of terms. It's a very simple good versus evil dynamic, at least from Finn's perspective. Ice King steals a princess, so Finn and Jake come along to kick his butt. Considering his status as a villain, Finn doesn't have a lot of sympathy for the IK. Even in episodes like Ricardio the Heart Guy, where Ice King is pointedly not the antagonist, Finn still contemplates letting him die. In Prisoners of Love, Finn is enraged at the Ice King to a rather extreme degree. Of course, these Finn rage moments were more of an early season 1 thing that the show dropped rather quickly. As in most other episodes, Finn seems to be more annoyed by Ice King than anything else. But I do think it's safe to say that Finn probably takes out a lot of unwarranted anger on Ice King. And he justifies this by labeling the Ice King as a bad guy, someone entirely deserving of all the pain Finn gives him. But while this is how Finn and Jake view the Ice King, we the audience get a few peeks behind the curtain as to why he does what he does. Going back to Prisoners of Love, we get a dream sequence in which Ice King contemplates why people don't like him. It's his very first appearance, and he's already getting a self-reflective moment like this one. In What Is Life, Ice King attempts to steal nectar from Finn. At first, we the audience, alongside Finn, are led to believe this is to help him capture a princess. But at the end of the episode, through another dream sequence, it's revealed that all Ice King really wanted was a son, someone to keep him company. He almost opens up to Finn and Jake about his loneliness at the end of The Eyes, but the pair fall asleep as he's in the middle of telling his story. In all of these examples, Finn remains ignorant to Ice King's struggles. But of course, this isn't to say that Finn is incapable of showing sympathy for the Ice King. For example, in What Have You Done, PB has the boys lock Ice King up for unknown reasons. However, Finn gets a guilty conscience when it's revealed that Ice King has not committed a single recent crime, which leads to Finn and Jake setting him free. Afterward, PB explains to Finn and Jake why she had them lock him up to begin with. That Ice King accidentally infected the Candy citizens, and the only way to cure them was to get him to howl, which he wouldn't do. Finn does attempt to get Ice King's howls, but does so consensually as Ice King technically didn't do anything wrong. This shows that Finn won't always resort to violence in scenarios in which he genuinely doesn't think the Ice King has done anything wrong. Another smaller example of this is in the Chamber of Frozen Blades. In this episode, Finn and Jake are caught breaking into Ice King's castle and destroying his stuff, all because they thought he was stealing a princess. The two end up feeling bad for this, and Finn vows to make things right. This is until it turns out Ice King did kidnap a princess, kind of, and the three have a big fight. But the point is, had Ice King not kidnapped Dr. Princess, the two would have made things right with him. And this all culminates at the end of Season 2 in Mortal Recoil. Finn is naturally hesitant to trust Ice King at first, considering the previous episode ended with him accidentally dropping PB in the Lich's well. But when the Lich-possessed PB proves to be too powerful for the boys alone, Finn concedes and gets Ice King's help. For the first time in the series' history, Finn and Ice King work together. Finn even tells Ice King that he did good. This sparks a bit of a shift in the Finn, Jake, and Ice King dynamic. As for the next few seasons, Ice King will, more often than not, try to befriend Finn and Jake rather than fight them. Of course, there were episodes before this point where Ice King showed interest in being Finn's friend, such as the aforementioned What Have You Done? But starting season 3, this becomes about as big of a part of his character as him kidnapping princesses, if not more so. From Ice King's very first episode in season 3, Hitman, we start to see a bit of a shift in the Finn, Jake, and Ice King dynamic. Instead of trying to fight Ice King as they normally would, the two boys instead treat him like a child, grounding him for 4 weeks. But while this obviously upsets the Ice King, all he really wants to do is hit Finn and Jake. So naturally, he hires the Scorcher, a hitman, to hit the two boys. But when the Scorcher ends up being more violent than the Ice King anticipated, he saves the boys' lives on multiple different occasions. God, I love this episode. One of the funniest of the whole show for sure. But I do think it also shows a bit of character growth for Ice King, as he no longer feels the need to cause much physical harm to the two boys. At least, not beyond a petty hit on the shoulder. I mean, when the quote-unquote villain is actively going out of his way to save our heroes' lives, he can't be all that bad. And in Ice King's next episode, still, he directly tries to become Finn and Jake's friend, albeit by freezing them. This is a pretty natural development for their relationship, if you really think about it. The reason why Ice King kidnapped princesses is because he's so lonely. But romantic love isn't the only kind of companionship out there. See Finn and Jake's brotherly bond. It makes sense that Ice King would get jealous of the type of relationship that Finn and Jake have with each other, and want to be a part of it. It's sort of an inverse of Wander and Haters dynamic in Wander Over Yonder, if you think about it. It's even revealed in this episode that Ice King knows a lot of personal information about Finn and Jake, such as the fact that Finn's favorite food is meatloaf, or that Jake doesn't cry because he's afraid of showing real emotion. You know, funny stuff like that. It is also this season where we get our very first Fiona and Cake episode, at the end of which it's revealed that Ice King likes Finn and Jake so much that he wrote literal fanfiction about the pair. Of course, we know from context over a decade later that Ice King didn't create Fiona and Cake. That was all Prismo's doing. But the point is that Ice King was still invested enough in these dreams to write about them. And besides, it's not like Prismo came up with all of the stories Ice King told. In Thank You, upon witnessing a snow golem and fire pup getting along, Finn gives Ice King a little kiss on the cheek. Aww. But now we get to the big one, the episode that changed the way both Finn and Jake and us the audience view the Ice King forever. Holly Jolly Secrets. But before we discuss the elephant in the room when it comes to this episode, I just feel like pointing out that Finn and Jake are kinda awful in this one. Not only do they steal what they know are Ice King's secret tapes, but they also actively shut Ice King out from joining them. And this isn't an episode like the Chamber of Frozen Blades, where the boys similarly violate the Ice King's privacy, but are then validated by the reveal that he actually was up to something. Here they just force themselves to watch a bunch of boring Ice King tapes for no reason. Finn especially is kind of a dumbass in this one. Like what, he thinks Ice King of all people left a bunch of cryptic messages in his own tapes? Only to just bury them where no one can find them? Why would he even do that? You know what, I'll say it, Ice King didn't really do anything wrong in this episode. Pretty much everything he does in this one is entirely provoked by Finn and Jake. But then we get the reveal in this episode, that Ice King is actually a man named Simon Petrikov who's been tormented by 1,000 years of wearing the crown. Along with just being an incredibly tragic backstory, I think this moment also puts things into perspective a little bit for Finn and Jake. That this old creep they've been avoiding this whole episode, who they've beaten up countless times, is really just a tormented old man looking for companionship. It's a moment that humanizes Ice King a little bit. Upon seeing this, Finn decides to give Ice King his tapes back. And once a year, they gather around to watch them again. And this moment sparks another shift in the Finn, Jake, and Ice King dynamic. As from here on, the boys are a bit more friendly towards Ice King. Of course, they'll still put a stop to Ice King if they need to, but they'll do so a bit more gently and without beating him up. And by the end of the series, Finn will almost exclusively refer to Ice King as Simon, which is just so sweet. But of course, I'm getting ahead of myself. In Season 4's Beyond This Earthly Realm, we get our second instance of Finn and Ice King teaming up when Finn is stuck in the spirit world. This episode is a pretty good microcosm of how the Finn and Ice King dynamic has changed over the years. Here, Finn is actively listening to Ice King and getting his help, something he was reluctant to do back in earlier seasons. As well as that, we get another instance of Ice King wanting to be Finn's friend, as Ice King plans on keeping Finn trapped in the spirit world, so he has no choice but to be his only friend. I love that this episode shows that, while they're on friendlier terms, Finn still won't take Ice King's bullshit, as, upon hearing the IK's plan, Finn threatens to unleash the other spirits back on the Ice Kingdom. Episodes like this one and Princess Monster Wife show that Finn and Jake aren't just gonna let what Ice King does slide by just because he has a tragic backstory. Ice King will still be punished if he does something bad. Outside of this episode, however, Finn and Ice King don't interact a ton throughout the rest of Season 4, as this was the year the show started giving Ice King more of his own stories that had little to do with Finn and Jake. We do, however, get a pretty important small moment near the end of I Remember You, where the two boys watch Ice King and Marcy sing together, and are naturally extremely confused. This is followed up on not too long after in Simon and Marcy, where Marceline tells Finn and Jake the story between her and Simon. Now obviously, the two have been aware of Ice King's past for a while now, but I do think that getting the perspective of someone like Marcy does change things a little bit. Because now it's not just, oh, this guy actually has a tragic past. Now that tragic past also affects someone close to them. It helps give Finn and Jake a bit more empathy for the Ice King, knowing how much Marcy cares about him. But this, unfortunately, does not stop Finn from doing what he does in Frost and Fire. This one is obviously pretty infamous for what Finn does to Flame Princess, but I think it's also notable just how terribly he treats Ice King here, actively picking fights between him and Phoebe solely for his own pleasure. And it is particularly sad coming not too long after gaining a better understanding of Ice King through Marceline. I will say, however, that I do think this is more of an act of carelessness than maliciousness. Like, I don't think Finn actively wanted to see Ice King get hurt. And that this is more of a case of Finn thinking with his dick, for the lack of a better term. I think what the story really speaks to is Finn's good versus evil mentality. That, in his own mind, he's a hero, so anything he does is good by default. And I think it's seeing how his actions hurt someone like Ice King that helped break the black and white mentality that Finn once held. Because Ice King really hadn't done anything wrong in this episode, outside of very mildly making fun of Finn and Phoebe at the start. So Finn is the one who needs to make things right with Ice King, as he directly causes the destruction of the Ice Kingdom. And he does so by allowing Ice King to stay at the treehouse. I know, I'm always saying this, but man, the status quo shift is such missed potential. Ice King living with Finn and Jake is such a fun concept that the show barely utilizes. Naturally, Ice King loves hanging with his pals Finn and Jake, to the point where he stays for weeks after the Ice Kingdom is finished being rebuilt. The boys get pretty fed up with Ice King's shenanigans. However, Finn is notably sympathetic towards Ice King, as it's his fault that he's homeless to begin with. They sorta start treating Ice King like he is their child. It's really funny. After the episode Playdate, however, we do hit a bit of a lull in terms of Finn and Ice King interactions. They do help Simon power a time machine in order to talk to Betty again in her titular episode. And there definitely is a novelty to seeing Finn and Jake interact with Simon in his non-magical form for the first time, even if it's rather brief. But Season 6 is basically absent of any Finn and Ice King interactions. And no, Water Park Prank doesn't count, as it canonically takes place in an alternate universe. The closest we get to an actual interaction between them is Finn observing Ice King at a party in Astral Plane. Ice King does mention to this Cloud Lady that he and Finn are super tight, much to Finn's chagrin, but Finn does extend a bit of sympathy towards Ice King once he gets upset and freezes everyone. Once we get to Season 7, however, we start seeing Finn and Ice King interact more regularly. And for basically the rest of the show, he's not really seen as a villain by the other characters or by the show itself. He's basically just the goofy old man who Finn and Jake hang out with sometimes. The closest Ice King comes to being treated like a villain in these seasons is probably when he kidnaps Finn in the Empress Eyes. But even that was just due to the Empress's manipulation. And the Ice King himself is portrayed as rather sympathetic in the episode. In the episode Elemental, Jake even refers to Ice King as semi-reformed. The later seasons of Adventure Time have plenty examples of Finn and Jake being friendly towards the Ice King. In Kane's Ransom, the two boys help Ice King find Gunter. In the aforementioned Elemental, they investigate the crack in Ice King's castle. They team up to help save Ooh in the Elements miniseries. In Fiona and Cake and Fiona, the boys attend Ice King's Fiona and Cake reading. And in Blananas, Finn and Ice King bond over their love of Blah magazine. And those are only a few examples. Ice King himself is notably a lot happier and more chill in these seasons because of his relationship with Finn and Jake. By this point in the series, Ice King has stopped kidnapping princesses entirely, and that's because he has no reason to now that he has companionship in the form of Finn and Jake. But what I like most about Finn and Ice King's relationship in these seasons is that they don't just become all buddy-buddy, as I feel typically happens in shows like this, where the protagonist befriends one of the antagonists. Nah, Finn and Jake still very clearly view him as this weird old man, and the show itself doesn't really portray Ice King as an entirely new person. It's just that the characters treat Ice King with a new level of empathy and understanding. One of my favorite Finn and Ice King moments in the entire show takes place in the episode Don't Look. In this episode, Finn is cursed with these magic eyeballs that turn anyone he looks at into the version of themselves that he views them as. And when he looks at Ice King, he turns him back into Simon. It's an incredibly wholesome moment, but I also love the attention to detail here. That instead of wearing the suit that both Finn and us, the audience, recognize Simon in, he wears nothing but the Ice King's diaper, which represents the idea that Finn still views the Ice King as somewhat embarrassing, even if he has gained a newfound sense of empathy for him over the years. I love that Finn can still be annoyed or weirded out by Ice King, while still treating him with a level of empathy that he didn't before. And his friendship with Ice King definitely contributed to him being a generally more empathetic person by the end of the show. Someone more willing to talk things out with the people he disagrees with, rather than just beating them up. And the way the Finn and Ice King dynamic has changed over the years is shown off beautifully in Come Along With Me. As when Ice King and Betty are pushed into Gold's mouth, Finn jumps in after them. This is kind of a big moment for Finn. It's the last real heroic thing he does in the original series. And he does it to save Ice King. Could you imagine Finn doing something like this in Season 1? I sure can't. And when Finn almost gives up trying to save them, we get one of my favorite dialogue exchanges in the entire show. As, in what he thinks are his final moments, Simon comforts Finn. God, what a cool scene. One of my favorites in Come Along With Me. And luckily for us, but unluckily for Simon, Finn attempts to return the favor about 12 years later. When Simon is feeling isolated in a world where everyone is magic except him, Finn tries to distract him by taking him on an adventure. It doesn't really work out so well. Finn is very clearly still coping with the loss of Jake, and isn't in the right mental state to help Simon. But the fact that he tries to anyways is just so wholesome, and such a great evolution of their friendship. And while the quest itself doesn't really help Simon at all, we do get a nice moment of Simon talking to Finn about Betty, in what is the only scene in the episode in which he appears to be genuinely happy. Finn might be too much of a himbo for his own good at this point in his life, but he's trying his best, okay? I think what we can all learn from Finn and Ice King's dynamic over the years is the importance of empathy. It feels like now more than ever, we as people are divided against each other. We put each other in these little boxes so that we can distance ourselves from the people we don't like. But when you really get to know someone, you realize that we're all just people trying to do our best. Which of course isn't to say you have to be besties with people you don't like. But being able to recognize a person or group of people you dislike as people certainly goes a long way. You might come to realize that that group or person you've come to hate so much maybe isn't so bad after all. Be kind to each other and have a good one. Squill out.